Good afternoon, Bethany Bible Post College and Young Adults fam. It's good to be with you again in this virtual devotional as we continue in our study of the book of James. I'm going to be reading and kicking it off in James 5 today, and just happy that you can join us. I hope that we're all continuing to just stay connected with each other in our community, reaching out, praying for one another. Let's really just take this time to be really attentive with one another and just really take that extra step to really reach out to one another, even though it can be harder. But, it's been hard for some of us, and I know we're going to get through this. It was hard not being able to worship with each other on Easter, but I miss you all. I'm praying for you all, and I know that we're all doing the same thing for one another as well. So I'm going to get started reading James 5, 1 through 6. It says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your field, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." So in this passage, James continues his rebuke of the community here. He had previously been speaking to the poorer folks of the community, talking about their coveting and stuff like this, but here he's addressing the rich specifically, which would indicate that it's a shared community of rich and poor believers. But right here he's talking about some of the issues that the rich are struggling with, which is issues of fraud and oppression of the poor, things that are really really difficult, especially in a community where you're both striving to live together in peace and unity as believers. So here James tells them to weep and howl for the misery that is coming upon them. And this misery is ultimately what awaits all those who put their trust in their riches rather than the Lord. And that's because riches don't deliver and riches don't sustain. Eventually they fade away and they become moth-eaten, they wither, they do not last, but God does. And so this misery awaits them because eventually they're going to get caught up and realize that truth. And so these things that they have put their trust in, their riches, their wealth, their prosperity, these things fade, and it's misplaced trust. And this section reminds me so much of 1 Corinthians 3, 10 through 15, where it also talks about testing of faith. It's like the Bema seat of Christ, where he's judging a race, essentially, is the view of the word Bema seat. And the materials that are used there are tested as by fire, and the fire tests and destroys those that are made out of weaker materials and shows the authenticity and the integrity of the materials that are used in that passage. And here it's a very similar phrasing to the riches materials that they're putting their faith in withering away, as they themselves will if they continue to trust in those. And so this also mentions that they are laying up earthly treasures as well in the last days, which is something that Jesus himself commanded not to do. He said, "Do not store up treasures for yourself on earth, but lay up treasures in heaven." So it really just gives us a mindset of what's going on in the rich person's life here, is that they are trusting in their material possessions, which ultimately cannot deliver them. And not only that, but they are so indulged in themselves, in their own luxury, that they are not paying attention to the needs of their brothers, their own laborers in their community of believers who are poor, and are rather oppressing them and committing fraud by withholding their wages. And the really significant part of this passage to me is that the poor are crying out to God rather than resisting these people who are pretty much committing crimes against them. And the most significant part is that it has reached the ear of the Lord of hosts. God has heard their cry. And that is a warning from James to the rich believers here, is that if you're trusting in your material possessions yet opposing your brother and causing quarrels, like that's cause for some discomfort in your life as a believer if you're not walking with God through that, and rather you're just trusting in your riches. It's not going to get you anywhere. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially as it leads into this next passage where it talks about patience and suffering, is that these believers who are being oppressed by the rich people, they are trusting in God, which is where their strength and patience is coming from. And so I'd say that we should really take that as an encouragement to also be patient in our trials right now, and also just to take in mind, what are we putting our trust in? What materials, what feelings, what other things that aren't from God are we putting our trust in to sustain us, especially in this time where we can't be with our community of believers for that strengthening? Let's really take this time to examine ourselves and say, what are we using to sustain ourselves, and really bring that before God. So God bless you all. I hope that this passage is an encouragement to you. I know it was to me, and I look forward to being with you all once again, and hopefully a couple of weeks at the most.